The signal had been traveling through the cold emptiness of space for 11 standard cycles before anyone in the galactic Concord decided to pay attention to it. It was a weak thing, barely more than a whisper against the background noise of the universe. But it was repeating, over and over again, in the universal distress frequency that every spacefaring species recognized. Someone was dying out there. Someone was calling for help. Ambassador Eth of the Collective stood in the center of the Concord's emergency response chamber, her 4 pale blue eyes fixed on the holographic star map that floated before her. She was tall by the standards of her species, nearly 2 meters in height, with smooth gray skin that shifted to a darker shade when she was stressed. Right now, her skin was almost black. "Play the signal again," she ordered. The chamber's AI and the transmission filled the room once more. It was broken and fragmented, corrupted by distance and damage, but the meaning was clear enough. A vessel called the Gentle Dawn was under attack. Their engines were destroyed. Their weapons were offline. They were requesting immediate assistance from any ship capable of responding. The Gentle Dawn was a diplomatic courier, one of the finest vessels in the Concord's fleet. It had been carrying representatives from 7 different species to a trade negotiation on the far side of the galaxy. 53 souls aboard, all of them important, all of them valuable. All of them probably already dead. "Can we determine the location of the attack?" Eth asked. The AI projected a new image onto the star map, a blinking red dot in a region of space that made every ambassador in the chamber flinch. The signal had originated from a system on the very edge of explored space, in a sector that the Concord had deliberately avoided for centuries. It was near Terra. High Coordinator rose from his seat, his crystalline body catching the light and scattering it into rainbow patterns across the walls. He was ancient by any species standards, over 4,000 years old, and he had seen more conflict and tragedy than anyone else in the room. But even he looked afraid. "We cannot send rescue vessels," he declared, his voice resonating through the chamber like the ringing of a great bell. "The trajectory required would bring our ships within sensor range of the—" No one argued with him. No one even tried. That was what they called it, the third planet orbiting a small yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. Its official designation in the Concord's records was Sol 3, but everyone knew it by its other name. Terra, Earth, the world that should not exist, home to a species that should never have evolved. Eth had read the reports. Every ambassador had. They were required reading for anyone who hoped to understand the true nature of the galaxy, the hidden dangers that lurked between the stars. The reports described a planet that seemed designed by some malevolent god to produce the most dangerous life forms imaginable. Terra had a yellow sun, a type of star that bathed its planets in radiation that would kill most species within hours. Its atmosphere was a toxic mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, the latter being one of the most corrosive substances known to galactic science. The planet's gravity was crushing, nearly twice the standard for habitable worlds. Its climate was wildly unstable, swinging between extremes of heat and cold that could kill within minutes. And that was just the environment. The life forms that had evolved there were even worse. Every ecosystem on Terra was a war zone. Predators hunted in every climate, from the frozen poles to the scorching deserts. Plants produced toxins to defend themselves. Insects carried diseases. The oceans were filled with creatures that could swallow a person whole. Even the smallest organisms, the bacteria and viruses that were invisible to the naked eye, were capable of killing in days or hours. In such an environment, only the most aggressive, the most adaptable, the most ruthlessly competitive species could survive. And at the top of that brutal food chain stood humanity. The humans were tool users, like most intelligent species. They had developed language and culture and technology, like most intelligent species. But unlike most intelligent species, They had done so while fighting for survival every single day of their existence. They had evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill them, and they had won. They had won so completely that they had begun reaching out into space, building vessels capable of traveling between worlds, sending probes and signals into the darkness. The conquered had been watching them for centuries, carefully, quietly, from a distance that they hoped was safe. No one wanted to make first contact with the natives. No one wanted to find out what would happen if humanity turned its attention outward, toward the stars, toward other species. The reports were very clear on this point. Humanity was dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever produced. And now, the gentle dawn had sent a distress signal from a system that bordered their territory. Perhaps they will not notice, suggested Trade Minister, his voice barely above a whisper. He was a small species with delicate features and an even more delicate constitution. His kind had evolved on a paradise world, a place of gentle breezes and abundant food and no predators whatsoever. The very idea of Terra made him want to hide. The humans notice everything, Eth replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Their sensors are primitive by our standards, but they compensate with paranoia. They have been watching the skis since before they developed, searching for any sign of threat. They will detect the distress signal. They probably already have. Then what do we do? Demanded. We cannot simply abandon our people. 53 lives, ambassador, representatives from 7 species. We cannot just leave them to die. We may have no choice, said. His crystal body was vibrating now, producing a low hum that everyone in the chamber could feel in their bones. It was a sign of extreme distress, and it silenced whatever protests might have been forming. The Scorn raiders who attack the Gentle Dawn are brutal, but they are predictable. They take slaves, they demand ransoms, they can be negotiated with. The humans are unknown. We do not know how they would react to the presence of conquered vessels in their space. We do not know what they would do if they perceived us as a threat. They are still primitive, Eth pointed out. They have only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last few decades, and their vessels are slow and crude by our standards. Surely they cannot pose a serious threat to conquered warships. His laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. You have read the reports, Ambassador, but you have not understood them. The humans did not evolve on a paradise world. They did not have the luxury of developing their technology slowly, carefully, peacefully. Every advance they made was driven by competition and conflict. Their history is written in blood. He gestured, and the holographic display changed. Now it showed images from Terra, surveillance footage captured by conquered probes over the centuries. Eth had seen some of these images before, but they still made her sick. Cities burning, armies clashing on open fields, weapons that could level entire nations, bombs that could poison the very air and water. Humans fighting humans endlessly, relentlessly, with a creativity and determination that was almost admirable if it was not so terrifying. They have fought more wars in the last 1,000 years than the conquered has fought in 10,000, continued. They have developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet, and they have come close to using them on multiple occasions. They are aggressive, unpredictable, and utterly fearless. And their technology, while primitive in some ways, is devastatingly effective in others. The display changed again, showing a human warship. It was an ugly thing, all sharp angles and exposed machinery, nothing like the sleek and elegant vessels of the conquered. But there was something about it that made Eth's skin crawl, a sense of barely contained violence, of power waiting to be unleashed. Their weapons are based on kinetic projectiles, explained. They accelerate solid objects to enormous velocities and fire them at their targets. The energy involved is immense, far more than our shields are designed to withstand. Our energy weapons are cleaner and more precise, but they lack the raw destructive force of human munitions. A single human warship could likely destroy an entire conquered battle group before we even understood what was happening. Silence fell over the chamber. Eth felt the weight of it pressing down on her, heavier than Terra's crushing gravity. She thought about the 53 souls aboard the Gentle Dawn, trapped and terrified, waiting for help that would never come. She thought about the Scorn Raiders, circling like predators, savoring their victory. And she thought about the humans. They were monsters, according to the reports, violent, aggressive, dangerous beyond measure. But there was something else in those reports, something that the Conquered had chosen to ignore because it did not fit with their narrative. The humans were not just warriors. They were also explorers, scientists, artists. They created music that could move listeners to tears and literature that explored the depths of the soul. They built monuments to beauty and dreamed of reaching the stars. And they helped each other. That was the part that confused the Conquered the most. Despite their violent nature, despite their long history of conflict, the humans also had a powerful instinct for cooperation and compassion. They formed communities and nations, built hospitals and schools, created systems of law and justice that protected the weak from the strong. When disaster struck, they rushed to help each other, often at great personal risk. They seemed to genuinely care about the welfare of strangers, even strangers they had never met. It was a contradiction that the Conquered could not explain. How could a species be simultaneously so violent and so kind? How could they build weapons capable of ending all life on their planet while also building shelters for the homeless and food banks for the hungry? It made no sense. But perhaps, Ed thought, perhaps that contradiction was the key to understanding them. What if they respond to the distress signal? She asked quietly. Stared at her. What do you mean? The humans have been reaching out into space for decades. They have been searching for evidence of other intelligent life. What if they detect the Gentle Dawn's distress signal? What if they decide to investigate? They would never, said, but his voice was uncertain. Why not? We know they have the technology. Their faster-than-light drives are crude, but they work. And we know they have the motivation. They are curious, exploratory, always seeking new horizons. If they heard a call for help from beyond their system, would they really ignore it? Consider this. It is possible, he admitted. The humans are unpredictable. They might ignore the signal or they might investigate. If they investigate, they might try to help or they might see the situation as an opportunity for conquest. We simply do not know. Then we should at least try to reach the Gentle Dawn ourselves, Eth argued. If we can rescue our people before the humans arrive, we can avoid the risk entirely. If we cannot, then at least we will have tried. We will have honored our duty to protect our citizens. And if we encounter the humans in the process? Eth took a deep breath. Then we will learn something new about them. We will learn whether they are the monsters of the reports or something else entirely. And perhaps, just perhaps, we will find that they are not as dangerous as we feared. Was silent for a long moment. The other ambassadors watched him, waiting for his decision. He was the High Coordinator, the leader of the Conquered, the voice that spoke for all the member species. His word was law. Finally, he shook his great crystalline head. The risk is too great. The potential consequences of contact with the natives are too severe. We cannot authorize a rescue mission. Eth felt something inside her break. It was a small thing, a tiny piece of hope that she had not even known she was carrying. But it was gone now, crushed by the weight of fear and caution. Then those aboard the Gentle Dawn are already dead, she said, her voice flat and empty. No one contradicted her. The meeting ended shortly after that. The ambassadors filed out of the chamber, returning to their quarters, their ships, their lives. They would compose letters of condolence for the families of the lost. They would hold memorial services and speak of the tragedy of it all. And then they would move on because that was what the Conquered did. They survived by avoiding risk, by staying safe, by never challenging the status. Eth remained in the chamber long after the others had gone. She stood before the holographic star map, staring at the blinking red dot that marked the position of the Gentle Dawn. She thought about the people aboard that ship, the diplomats and staff she had known for years, the friends she would never see again. And she thought about the humans. They were out there somewhere on there. They were watching the skies, searching for signs of life, dreaming of the stars. They had no idea that the galaxy was full of species that feared them, that entire civilizations had been built around avoiding contact with them. They had no idea that somewhere not far from their home, a ship full of aliens was dying, and no one was coming to help. Or maybe they did know. Maybe they had already detected the distress signal. Maybe, even now, they were preparing a response. The thought should have terrified her, but strangely it gave her hope. Far away, in a small metal structure orbiting a planet covered in blue and green and white, a human named Jake was having a very bad day. It had started normally enough. He had woken up in his cramped quarters, eaten a breakfast of reconstituted eggs and synthetic bacon, and reported for duty at the command center of Orbital Listening Post Echo 7. It was a boring job, monitoring the endless static of deep space, searching for signals that never came. But it paid well, and it kept him close to the stars, and that was all Jake had ever really wanted. He was on his third cup of coffee, the bitter black liquid that kept him awake through the long shifts, when the alert came through. It was a soft chime, easily missed, but Jake had been doing this job for 8 years. He knew what that sound meant. "What have we got?" he asked, setting down his mug and crossing the cramped command center to where Lieutenant Cole was hunched over her console. Was young, barely 25, but she was one of the best signal analysts in the fleet. Her fingers danced across the controls with the ease of long practice, pulling up data streams and frequency analyses. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many late nights and not enough sleep. "I'm not sure yet," she admitted. "It's definitely artificial. The pattern is too regular to be natural, but it's not like anything in our database. It's not human, that's for sure." Jake felt his heart rate increase. Not human. Those words had been his dream for as long as he could remember. He had grown up on stories of alien contact, of first meetings between humanity and the strange creatures that must surely exist somewhere among the stars. He had joined the military specifically to be part of the search, to be there when the moment finally came. "Can you clean it up?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Working on it." Isolated the primary frequency and ran it through every translation algorithm they had. Most of them returned garbage, strings of meaningless characters that made no sense in any human language. But there was one program, an experimental system designed by a linguist named Dr. Helen in Geneva, that produced something almost coherent. "Under attack," the computer translated its synthetic voice flat and emotionless. "Engines disabled. Life support failing. Request immediate assistance. Coordinates follow." Jake stared at the screen. He read the words again just to make sure he understood. Then he read them a third time. "They're calling for help," he said, almost to himself. "Someone out there is calling for help." Turned to look at him. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Sir, what do we do?" It was a good question. There were protocols for this situation, procedures that had been developed decades ago in case humanity ever made contact with alien life. But those protocols assumed a gradual, controlled introduction, a slow exchange of information that would allow both sides to get to know each other. They did not assume a distress call, a cry for help from beings who were dying. Jake reached for the priority communication channel. It was a direct line to Central Command, bypassing all the usual bureaucracy and red tape. He had never used it before. He had never had a reason to. "Echo 7 to CENTCOM," he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "We have a situation. Priority 1. Repeat, Priority 1. We have detected an artificial signal of non-human origin. It appears to be a distress call, requesting immediate guidance." The response came almost instantly, which told Jake everything he needed to know about how seriously they were taking this. Echo 7, this is CENTCOM. Please confirm. Are you reporting contact with extraterrestrial intelligence? Confirmed, CENTCOM. The signal is definitely artificial and it is definitely not human. It matches no known protocol in our database, but the message is clear. Someone is out there and they are asking for help. There was a long pause. Jake could imagine the chaos on the other end of the line, the frantic calls being made to higher and higher levels of command, the debates and arguments about what to do. He had just changed everything, and everyone knew it. Finally, the voice returned. Echo 7, maintain your position and continue monitoring the signal. Do not repeat, do not attempt to respond. Assistance is being dispatched. CENTCOM out. Jake leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. His hands were shaking, he realized. He was not sure if it was from excitement or fear. Maybe both. What happens now? Asked. Now we wait, Jake replied, and we see what happens next. What happened next was beyond anything Jake could have imagined. Within 6 hours, the news had reached the highest levels of every major government on Earth. The President of the United States was briefed in the Situation Room. The Prime Ministers of Britain and Canada were awakened in the middle of the night. The Chancellor of Germany and the President of France held an emergency video conference. The entire world, it seemed, had suddenly become very interested in a weak signal from the edge of space. Within 12 hours, a decision had been made. They were going to help. Admiral Vance stood before the assembled Joint Chiefs in the Pentagon's secure conference room, a holographic display floating in the air before her. She was 62 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen more than their share of hardship. She had commanded fleets, fought pirates, and survived 3 assassination attempts. Nothing scared her anymore. Except this scared her. Ladies and, she began, her voice steady despite the fear that churned in her gut, we are facing a situation unprecedented in human history. We have confirmed contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, and they are asking for our help. The room was silent. Every face was turned toward her, waiting. The vessel sending the distress signal is approximately 47 light hours from our current position, in a system on the edge of explored space. Based on our analysis of the signal, they are under attack by hostile forces. Their engines are disabled, their life support is failing, and they will die without assistance. She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. We have the capability to help. Our fastest ship, the Endurance, is equipped with the experimental drive developed by Doctor's team. According to their calculations, we can reach the distressed vessel in approximately 8 days. General Christopher Boyd raised his hand. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and square-jawed, with the look of someone who had spent his entire life preparing for war. Admiral, that drive has never been tested beyond the orbit of Mars. We have no idea if it will work at interstellar distances. We could be sending 70 crew members to their deaths. That's correct, admitted. The risk is significant. Doctor's team assures me the mathematics are sound, but we all know that theory and practice are not the same thing. There is a real possibility that the Endurance will tear itself apart the moment it attempts to jump. Then why are we even considering this? Boyd demanded. We don't know who these aliens are. We don't know if the distress signal is genuine. For all we know, it could be a trap. Nodded. Those are valid concerns, General, but consider the alternative. We have the chance to make first contact with an alien species to show them who we are and what we stand for. If we ignore their call for help, what does that say about humanity? What does it tell the universe about the kind of people we are? It tells them we're cautious, Boyd replied. It tells them we're smart enough not to walk into obvious traps. It tells them we're cowards, countered. It tells them we're the kind of species that lets others die because helping them might be inconvenient. Is that the message we want to send? The room fell silent again. Could see the conflict on every face, the fear warring with the hope. They were all thinking the same thing, she knew. This was the moment they had dreamed of their entire lives, the moment when humanity would finally reach out to the stars and find that they were not alone. But it was also the moment they had feared, the moment when everything they knew would change forever. Finally, General Sandra Martinez spoke up. She was the youngest person in the room, barely 40, but she had risen through the ranks faster than anyone in military history. She was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly fearless. "I say we go," she said simply. "Yes, the risk is significant. Yes, we might lose the ship and everyone on it. But the potential reward is incalculable. If we succeed, we will have established contact with an alien civilization. We will have proven that humanity is capable of compassion and courage on a galactic scale. We will have taken the first step toward a future that none of us can even imagine." She looked around the room, meeting every eye. "And if we fail, we will have failed trying to save lives. That is a failure I can live with." The vote was unanimous. 20 hours later, the Endurance launched from the orbital shipyard at Point 2. It was a remarkable vessel, the culmination of decades of research and development, the finest ship humanity had ever built. Its hull was reinforced with advanced composites that could withstand the stresses of faster-than-light travel. Its engines were capable of accelerating to a significant fraction of light speed using conventional thrust. And buried deep in its core was the drive, the device that would allow it to cheat the laws of physics and cross the vast distances between stars. Captain Daniel stood on the bridge, watching the Earth shrink behind them. He was 45 years old, a career military officer who had spent his life preparing for missions that never happened. Moon bases that were canceled due to budget cuts. Mars expeditions that lost funding in congressional committees. A generation ship project that had been reduced to a single prototype gathering dust in a warehouse in Nevada. But this mission was happening. This mission was real. "All stations report ready," announced Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, his executive officer. She was standing beside him, her dark eyes fixed on the displays that covered the forward bulkhead. "Engineering confirms the drive is stable. For now." "For now," Daniel repeated, shaking his head. "That's very reassuring, Commander." Maria smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible, but it was there. "You wanted excitement, Captain. You said so yourself when they offered you this command. You said you were tired of sitting in conference rooms and writing reports. You said you wanted to actually do something." "I wanted a nice, safe mission to the outer planets," Daniel corrected her. "Maybe a survey of the belt, something with minimal risk and maximum scientific value. I did not sign up to test an experimental drive on an interstellar rescue mission." "Life is what happens when you're making other plans." Daniel had no response to that. He turned back to the viewport, watching the stars that glittered in the endless darkness. Somewhere out there, 47 light hours away, aliens were dying. They had called for help, and humanity had answered. He hoped they would not regret it. "Navigation," he called out, "confirm our heading." Ensign Peter was hunched over his console, running final calculations. He was young, barely 23, but he was the best navigator in the fleet. "Course locked, Captain. Destination coordinates are confirmed. We are ready to jump on your command." Daniel took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of truth. Everything humanity had ever dreamed about, everything they had ever feared, came down to this single instant. "All hands prepare for faster-than-light transition. Secure all stations. This is not a drill." He paused, letting the crew prepare themselves. "Engage." The drive activated with a sound that Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. It was not a roar or a hum or any of the sounds that science fiction had prepared him for. It was a feeling, a vibration that seemed to pass through his bones, through his very soul. For a moment, He felt like he was everywhere and nowhere at once, stretched across the universe like a note of music that had been held too long. And then it was over. The stars outside the viewport had changed. They were different stars now, arranged in different patterns, shining with different colors. The Earth was gone, the sun was gone, everything familiar was gone. They were somewhere else entirely. "Status report," Daniel ordered, gripping the arms of his command chair to steady himself. Maria was already checking the displays. All primary systems functional. Minor damage to secondary power conduits. Engineering reports the drive needs at least 6 hours to recharge before we can attempt another jump. But we made it, Captain. We actually made it. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. They had done it. They had traveled faster than light, crossed the vast distances between stars in a single instant. It was impossible, according to the old physics. But humanity had never been very good at accepting impossible. "Time to destination?" he asked. "Approximately 7 days at maximum conventional thrust," Peter replied. "We can cut that to 5 if we push the engines beyond recommended limits. Do it every hour counts." The Endurance changed course, its engines flaring to life as it accelerated toward the distant dot of light that marked their destination. Behind them, the pathway they had traveled through compressed space was already closing, the fabric of reality healing itself after their passage. Ahead of them, somewhere in the darkness, aliens were waiting. Aboard the Gentle Dawn, Ambassador Eth had given up hope. It had been 3 days since the attack, 3 days of terror and despair. The Scorn raiders had been thorough in their assault, systematically destroying every system that might allow the diplomatic vessel to escape or fight back. The engines were gone, reduced to twisted metal and sparking wires. The weapons were offline, their power conduits severed beyond repair. The communication array was barely functional, capable of sending only the automated distress signal that repeated endlessly into the void. And the Scorn were playing with them. That was the worst part, Eth thought. If the raiders had simply wanted to destroy them, they could have done so in minutes. But the Scorn were not interested in destruction. They were interested in fear. They were slavers, merchants of misery who made their living by capturing and selling sentient beings to the highest bidder. And the survivors of the Gentle Dawn would bring a high price indeed. 53 diplomats and staff, representing 7 different species. Each one would be worth a fortune on the slave markets of the Outer Rim. Each one would bring the Scorn closer to their goal of wealth and power. But first, the Scorn wanted them to suffer. The raiders fired occasional shots at the crippled vessel, targeting non-essential systems like water recycling and atmospheric processing. Each hit was carefully calculated to increase the passengers' terror without actually killing them. The message was clear. We can destroy you whenever we want, but we choose to let you live. For now. Eth had gathered the survivors in the central cargo hold, the largest open space on the ship. It was cramped and cold and smelled of recycled air and fear. But it was the safest place they had, the most heavily shielded section of the vessel, and she hoped it might protect them a little longer. "How long until they board?" asked Delegate of the. He was a small being, barely a meter tall, with a crest of bright feathers that normally stood tall and proud. Now those feathers lay flat against his skull, a sign of absolute submission. His people had evolved as prey animals on there, and every instinct he had was screaming at him to run, to hide, to do anything to escape the predators that circled outside. "Less than 1 cycle," Eth replied. Her voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a diplomat who had spent centuries learning to hide her emotions. But inside she was screaming just as loudly as, "They are savoring this. They want us to be as frightened as possible when they finally take us." "Can we not fight them?" asked Trade Coordinator of the. She was young for her species, barely 100 years old, but she had already made a name for herself as a brilliant negotiator. Unfortunately, there was nothing to negotiate here. Surely there must be something we can do. Eth shook her head. The security officers died in the initial attack. They gave their lives to buy us time to seal the bulkheads. We have no weapons, no training, no way to resist. When the Scorn come for us, we will have no choice but to surrender." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the cargo hold, the survivors huddled together, drawing what comfort they could from each other's presence. Some were weeping. Some were praying. Some were simply staring into space, their minds unable to process the reality of what was happening. And then the ship's damaged AI spoke. "I have detected something unusual." The voice crackled through damaged speakers, distorted by the failing electronics but still understandable. "A vessel is approaching at high velocity. Configuration unknown." Eth felt a cold dread settle in her stomachs. Multiple stomachs, she reminded herself. Her species had 3. Another Scorn ship. Negative. The vessel does not match any known Scorn configuration. It appears to be traveling at faster-than-light velocities, which should be impossible without a class drive system. "The Conquered has drives," pointed out, a flicker of hope in his voice. "Perhaps help has come after all." "The vessel does not match any known Conquered configuration," the AI repeated. "Its transponder is broadcasting in an unknown protocol. However, based on trajectory analysis, it appears to have originated from the system designated Sol." The cargo hold fell silent. Every being present understood what those words meant. Sol was the star that warmed Terra. Terra was and was home to the most terrifying species the galaxy had ever known. "The humans," whispered, his feathers somehow pressing even flatter against his skull. "The humans are coming." Made a small sound that might have been a prayer or might have been a curse. "We are doomed. First the Scorn and now the natives. The universe truly hates us." But Eth was staring at the sensor display, watching the blinking dot that represented the approaching vessel. Her mind was racing, processing possibilities, calculating odds. The humans were dangerous, yes. Everyone knew that. But the Scorn were dangerous too, and the Scorn were definitely going to kill them or enslave them. The humans, at least, were an unknown quantity. "We are saved," she said quietly, not entirely believing the words even as she spoke them. Stared at her as if she had gone mad. "Saved? By the natives? Ambassador, have you forgotten everything we know about those creatures? They are monsters, violent, aggressive, unpredictable. If they come here, they will probably kill us themselves." "Perhaps," Eth admitted. "But consider the alternative. The Scorn will definitely enslave us. They will sell us to the highest bidder and we will spend the rest of our lives in chains. The humans might kill us, but they might also help us. They heard our distress signal and they came. That has to mean something." "It means they are curious," argued. "It means they saw an opportunity and decided to investigate. It does not mean they want to help us." "We shall see." The argument might have continued, but the AI interrupted with another announcement. "The approaching vessel has dropped out of faster-than-light travel. It is now approaching at conventional velocities. Estimated time to arrival, 4 standard hours." 4 hours. Eth closed her eyes and tried to imagine what would happen next. The Scorn would see the newcomer and react in one of 2 ways. They might flee, deciding that an unknown vessel was too great a risk. Or they might attack, seeing the new arrival as a threat to be eliminated or a prize to be taken. She hoped they would flee, but she suspected they would attack. The Scorn were not known for their intelligence. The Endurance dropped out of faster-than-light travel with all the grace of a meteor crashing into an atmosphere. Every system on the ship flickered, half the lights went out, and somewhere in the engineering section, someone was definitely screaming. Captain Daniel gripped his armrests and waited for the chaos to subside. It took longer than he would have liked. "Status report," he ordered, his voice rough. Maria Santos was already at her station, pulling up data on damaged systems. "We are alive," she reported, sounding genuinely surprised. "All primary systems are functional. Secondary power conduits took some damage, but engineering has already isolated the affected sections. Casualties are minimal. 6 crew members with minor injuries, all being treated by medical staff. The drive. Engineering reports it will need at least 6 hours before we can attempt another jump. The power requirements were higher than expected. They are running diagnostics now. Daniel nodded. They had made it. They had actually made it. Whatever happened next, they had proven that interstellar travel was possible. Humanity had taken its first step toward the stars. But there was no time to celebrate. Sensors, give me a picture of what we're dealing with. Lieutenant Alice Park was at the sensor station, her fingers dancing across the controls. She was the youngest member of the bridge crew, barely 22, but she had the sharpest eyes in the fleet. Nothing escaped her notice. I have the distress signal, she reported. Bearing 273, distance approximately 40,000 kilometers. The source appears to be a large vessel, possibly a transport or diplomatic ship. It is heavily damaged. I'm detecting hull breaches in multiple sections, failing power signatures and minimal life support readings. Survivors? Unknown. The damage is extensive, but some sections appear to be intact. It's possible that survivors are sheltering in protected areas. Daniel leaned forward in his chair. 40,000 kilometers. In space terms, that was practically next door. They could reach the damaged vessel in less than an hour at full thrust. What about hostiles? Alice's expression darkened. I'm detecting 4 additional vessels in the area. Configuration suggests military craft. They are arranged in a loose formation around the damaged vessel, and they appear to be actively firing on it. On screen, the main display shifted, showing an image captured by the Endurance's long-range sensors. It was grainy and distorted, but the essential details were clear. The damaged vessel was large, easily twice the size of the Endurance, with a graceful design that suggested advanced technology. But it was clearly crippled, its hull by weapons fire, its engines dark and silent. Surrounding it were 4 smaller ships, sleek and predatory, circling like sharks around a wounded whale. As Daniel watched, one of them fired a burst of energy at the damaged vessel, striking a section near the rear. The shot was not powerful enough to penetrate the hull, but it was clearly intended to intimidate rather than destroy. They're playing with them, Maria observed, her voice tight with anger. They're keeping them alive, but they're making sure they know who's in control. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He had seen bullies before, people who enjoyed hurting others simply because they could. He had never had much patience for them. Open a channel, he ordered, all frequencies. Alice looked at him with wide eyes. Sir. You heard me, Lieutenant. Open a channel. I want those ships to hear what I have to say. Alice hesitated for just a moment, then, Channel open, Captain. Daniel stood, straightening his uniform. This was it. The moment that would define humanity's first impression on the galaxy. He had to get it right. Attention, unidentified vessels. This is Captain Daniel of the Earth vessel Endurance. You are firing upon a ship broadcasting an emergency distress signal. Cease fire immediately and withdraw, or we will interpret your actions as hostile. Silence stretched for several seconds. Daniel waited, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea how the aliens would respond. They might not even understand his language. The translation programs they had developed were based on the distress signal, but there was no guarantee they would work both ways. Then the tactical display lit up. Incoming fire, Alice shouted. Multiple energy bursts bearing directly toward us. Evasive maneuvers, Daniel ordered, throwing himself back into his chair. All hands battle stations. The Endurance lurched as its thrusters fired, pushing it out of the path of the incoming weapons fire. Most of the shots went wide, but one clipped the starboard side, sending a shudder through the entire ship. Damage report, Daniel barked. Shields holding, Maria replied. That shot was more powerful than I expected, but our armor absorbed most of the impact. We can take a few more hits like that, but not many. Daniel made a decision. He had hoped for a peaceful resolution, but that hope was clearly not going to be fulfilled. These aliens, whoever they were, had chosen violence, and humanity had a lot of experience with violence. All weapons target the nearest hostile vessel, fire at will. The Endurance had been designed as an exploration ship, but Earth had a long history of learning hard lessons about the nature of the universe. Every ship that left the planet carried weapons, because humans knew better than to assume that the cosmos was friendly. The 4 turrets opened fire, accelerating tungsten slugs to a significant fraction of light speed. The slugs crossed the distance between the ships in a heartbeat, too fast to see, too fast to dodge. They struck the nearest hostile vessel with the force of a small nuclear explosion, punching through shields that were utterly unprepared for kinetic impacts. The ship disintegrated. One moment it was there, a sleek predator circling its prey. The next moment it was an expanding cloud of debris, scattered across the void like confetti at a parade. Direct hit, Alice reported, her voice carrying a note of shocked satisfaction. Target destroyed. The other 3 hostile vessels broke formation, clearly reassessing their situation. The Endurance took advantage of their hesitation, maneuvering to place itself between the attackers and the crippled diplomatic vessel. They're changing course, Maria observed. It looks like they're trying to flank us. Daniel smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Let them try. The battle lasted less than 4 minutes. The hostile ships were fast and maneuverable, with energy weapons that could have cut through most conquered vessels like a hot knife through butter. But they had never faced anything like the Endurance. They had never faced weapons that threw solid objects at relativistic velocities. They had never faced humans. The second hostile vessel fell to a concentrated volley of fire, its shields collapsing under the repeated kinetic impacts. The third attempted to flee, accelerating away from the battle at maximum thrust, but it was caught by a nuclear-tipped torpedo that reduced it to expanding plasma. The fourth managed to land several hits on the Endurance, overloading shields and scorching hull plating, before Maria personally took control of the point defense systems and threaded a round directly through its engine core. And then it was over. All hostiles destroyed, Alice confirmed, her voice shaking slightly. We have sustained moderate damage. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 7 contained by emergency bulkheads. 12 casualties, none fatal. Daniel allowed himself to breathe. They had won. Against 4 hostile vessels, against technology they did not understand, against odds that should have been impossible, they had won. But there was no time to celebrate. Open a channel to the diplomatic vessel, he ordered. Let's find out who we just saved. The channel opened, and Daniel found himself staring at an image of an alien. She was tall and gray-skinned, with 4 pale blue eyes that stared at him with an expression he could not read. Behind her, he could see other aliens, dozens of them, all watching him with a mixture of terror and hope. This is Captain Daniel of the Endurance, he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. Do you require assistance? The alien was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost disbelieving. You came, she said. You heard our signal and you came. Daniel nodded. Of course we came, you needed help, that's what people do. And in that moment, everything changed.